She stepped out of the bedroom in a dress I'd never seen before. Not once in our 21 years of marriage had she worn anything like that for me, low cut, satin, skin tone like it was stitched from intention itself. Her perfume reached the hallway before she did, that expensive kind she always said we couldn't afford unless it was a work dinner. And of course tonight was just drinks. With your CEO, I said flatly, without even raising my eyes from the document I was signing. She didn't answer right away, just adjusted her bra strap in the mirror near the foyer, slid in a diamond earring I didn't know she owned. Then, "It's just drinks with my CEO. Stop being insecure." She said it like I was being childish, jealous, pathetic even, like my discomfort was a character flaw she had to manage. She didn't even glance at me when she grabbed her clutch, just that little smirk in the hallway mirror, half amusement, half contempt. "Insecure," I repeated. I studied her like she was a stranger. "Enjoy?" That's all I said. She thought it was permission. She thought it was surrender. She even did that thing she does when she's smug, tilted her chin up like a closing argument, then she left. Just like that. The door clicked behind her, and the silence returned to the house like an old friend. I turned back to the folder on my desk. There's a particular pleasure that comes with watching someone you love believe they're getting away with something, while you're holding the blueprint to their collapse. And no, this isn't about revenge, not really. It's about precision. It's about restraint. It's about proving, finally, that I've been paying attention. The document in front of me, it was the last signature required on a transfer agreement, holding company restructuring, nothing flashy. But what it meant, in very simple terms, was that I now owned a controlling interest in Calder Row Ventures, the very firm where my wife had climbed her way up, one flirtatious smile at a time. She never noticed the extra mail. She never asked why I suddenly cared about her quarterly reports. She never once read the footers on the agreements she brought home, the ones she sometimes left lying out while she took evening calls in the hot tub. That was the beginning. Not tonight. No. Tonight was just the flourish at the end of a very long movement. I don't expect applause. I expect silence. The kind that follows truth when it arrives too late. Speaking of silence, if you're still reading this, you're one of the rare ones who actually pays attention. Most people skim and scroll like it's a sport. Over 90% of you won't subscribe, won't follow, won't bother clicking the button that lets us know these stories matter. But if you do care, click, subscribe. It's what keeps this whole operation alive. And trust me, this gets deeper. Back to her. I watched the driveway camera as her Uber pulled away. She leaned forward in the back seat, checking her lipstick in the reflection of her phone. I wondered if she'd even considered how that might look. I wondered if she ever thought I'd be the one watching. She hadn't bothered to turn off her location sharing, by the way. Not that I needed it. The restaurant was a rooftop place in Midtown. Trendy, exclusive. We'd eaten there once for our anniversary. She said it was too expensive for casual dining. Interesting how casual it became when someone else was buying. I'd made the reservation under a different name. Made sure it was the same corner table, the one with the skyline view. She'd walk in like she was on the cover of Forbes Seduction Monthly. Her CEO would probably stand up, charm oozing like cologne. They'd order something vintage, something she'd claim was company standard. She'd probably laugh at his terrible jokes, touch his wrist, the performance she always saved for audiences who weren't me. And somewhere between the second glass of wine and whatever overpriced dessert she flirted her way into, the manager would bring them the check. And the check would be signed, not just covered, signed by the man who owned the building, by the man who owned the LLC that owned the company, by the man who, up until 25 minutes ago, she thought was just a jealous husband scribbling invoices in his dusty study. Let her flirt, let her smirk, let her believe she's slipping out from under the weight of my silence. Because tonight, she doesn't just walk into a restaurant, she walks into a story I've been writing for over a year. And it begins, not with a bang, but with a quiet signature, on a dress she never wore for me. It started with a brunch she forgot she'd mentioned. Running late, she'd texted one Saturday morning. Quick bite with the team? Don't wait. That would have been believable if she didn't come home with a smear of lipstick under her chin and smelling like aftershave I didn't wear. She was dressed corporate casual on a Saturday, but her blouse was new, creased like she'd pulled it straight from a boutique bag. And she walked in, humming. "The team, huh?" I asked. "Don't start," she said, waving me off. I needed FaceTime with the execs. You say you support my career, right? That wasn't an answer. That was a redirect. A trick we both knew well. It wasn't just the brunch. It was the flights, the hotel upgrades, the sudden reschedules that pushed trips into weekends. When I asked why she was flying out of Newark instead of JFK like usual, she blinked like the question was in Cantonese. Why are you tracking my airport codes? She asked, like I was the one off kilter, like logic was stalking now. I didn't argue. Not once. 'Cause that's not how this works anymore. I let her think she was winning. I let her think I was still playing husband instead of opponent. I let her lie with a casual grace so she wouldn't notice when the table shifted underneath her. Instead, I made 3 phone calls. First to a friend of mine, retired finance guy, lives in Connecticut now, still sharper than broken glass. I told him I wanted to buy in. Quietly, discreetly, a whisper investment. I didn't want headlines. I wanted shadows. He introduced me to a capital firm that specializes in acquisition by dilution, small votes, silent buys, companies that slide in and gather control like a rising tide. Calder plus Rowe, the broker said, squinting at the screen. Good cash flow, shoddy internal structure. The board's aging out. Nobody's watching the back door. Perfect. I set up 2 Shellcore, one through a Delaware holding company, one through a trust under a cousin's name. I routed capital through both and told them to buy just under the radar. Tiny, forgettable chunks, a few percent here, a seat promise there, enough to be ignored. Every time she bragged about another team dinner, another late flight, another weekend seminar at a Vineyard Conference Center, I smiled. Sounds important, I'd say, handing her a fresh espresso. She never noticed the paperwork in the mail pile. New shareholder disclosures, vote notifications, restructure memos. She didn't notice because she didn't think I could do any of this. I was the man who stayed in the background, who paid the property taxes early, who fixed the leaky faucets, who mailed Christmas cards in November. She thought I was dull, predictable, safe. But safety is the best disguise. I studied her like a market trend, observed her moves, watched the timing of her trips and compared them to company press releases, found the rhythm of the CEO's travel, cross-referenced it with her expense reports. If I were a younger man, I'd have called it jealousy. At 58, I call it forensic accounting. One week, she flew to Chicago for a summit. The summit, by the way, was held in Miami. She didn't even check the company's social media. She just assumed I wouldn't look. That's what she was counting on. That I wouldn't look, that I wouldn't matter. That's the quiet betrayal most men miss. Not just the cheating, not just the lies, but the complete erasure of your awareness. As if your eyes were never open to begin with. So I opened mine. And I watched her like an investor watches a declining asset, not with rage, with math. Her CEO, Jonathan Bristow, married, 2 kids, plays squash on weekends, was a known quantity, smooth, shiny, the kind of man who uses the word synergy with a straight face. His wife hosted fundraiser galas for literacy. He hosted working dinners for women in backless dresses. His weakness wasn't women, though. It was leverage. He loved control. And like most men who crave it, he was blind to the moment it slips from his hands. He didn't notice the quiet shuffle of stock. He didn't realize the new strategic partners on the board were mine, that the chairman of the audit committee was now an old army buddy of mine who owed me more than one favor. And she thought she was charming her way up the ladder. She was flirting in a house I had already bought. Every flight, every smile, every low-cut blouse was her climbing a staircase I was pulling out behind her, one stair at a time. She never saw it. And when she said tonight was just drinks, that little smirk, that brush of her hand across her hip like punctuation, I didn't even blink. Because I already knew which waiter would bring the check. I already knew what it would say. I already knew whose name was on the dotted line of every silent agreement that kept her precious career propped up. This wasn't war. This was real estate. I just claimed what she abandoned. Quietly, legally, entirely. Let her drink. The toast has already been made. At exactly 6:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. Don't wait up. No punctuation. No emoji. Just that clean, sterile detachment she'd perfected over the last year, like I was a dog being told not to sit by the door. It didn't even sting anymore. It was expected. I stared at the message a beat too long, not because I was hurt, those days were done, but because there's something poetic about someone setting their own trap, smiling all the way through it. Then I made a call. "Corner table," I said, "private like before, and have the check ready." "Yes, sir," the voice answered. "And the signature?" I glanced at the pen on my desk. "Already filed." Across town, her Uber pulled into the valet circle of the Radcliffe. Rooftop dining, ambient lighting, overpriced cocktails, and a view that was 90% skyline and 10% pretentious nonsense. It was the kind of place that charged for ice if they thought they could get away with it. We'd gone once, years ago, when it first opened. She said it was too sterile for our anniversary. Apparently, it had warmed up. She stepped out of the car with practiced elegance. I watched it happen on my screen. Restaurant security feed tapped in weeks ago. She adjusted her dress like she expected to be watched, and she was right, just not by the man she imagined. Her CEO, Bristow, stood as she arrived. He wasn't just friendly, he was too friendly. That overeager lean in, the hand at her lower back, the kind of fake laugh that comes out a fraction too loud. She placed her clutch on the table like it was a trophy. They sat. She crossed her legs like a billboard ad. And then she laughed. Not the real laugh, the one that used to come out when we were snowed in or watching bad game shows. No, this was the synthetic laugh, the kind she reserved for pitch meetings and late-night hotel bars with conference name tags. Too loud, too sharp, too rehearsed. She ordered a cocktail with a name that sounded like a European insult. He toasted to another quarter of crushing it. She giggled and said, "Let's drink to vertical mobility." That one was new. I made a mental note. What neither of them noticed was the man in the black blazer near the bar, headset coiled behind one ear, tablet in hand. That was Nathan, the manager. I'd met him 3 times, once in the dining room, once in his office, once over breakfast, where I slid a stack of silent partner documents across the table and told him to memorize one instruction. When she arrives with Bristow, don't interrupt. Just observe. At dessert, bring the check, with the note attached. Nathan watched their table like a hawk dressed as a sommelier, not close enough to be weird, just close enough to hear her say, "Jonathan, I've been thinking about that promotion path we discussed in Napa. 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 That trip was supposed to be a conference. Now it had a name and a memory, and apparently a promotion path." I didn't flinch, just took a sip of whiskey, let the silence wrap around me like armor. She touched his wrist at one point, lightly, but deliberately. He didn't pull away. He laughed, said something about "you've got bite," and she replied, "Only when necessary." I didn't rage, I didn't scream. I watched the performance like I'd seen the rehearsal tapes and already knew where she'd miss her cue. The entire evening was a stage play, and she didn't know I'd bought the theater. Back at the restaurant, the waiter brought a second bottle of wine. She waved him off mid-sentence, too involved in whispering something with fake urgency. Her voice dropped to a tone that sounded more like a suggestion than a story. If I had to guess, she was laying the groundwork. The slow, "I'm undervalued" narrative. The "we work so well together" arc. She's not the first to script it, and Bristow wasn't the first idiot to buy the front row seat. But unlike most evenings, this one had a third act they didn't know about. Nathan circled by once, refilled their water glasses, and made a note on his tablet. The table beside them was suddenly cleared, quietly, like a stagehand preparing for a scene change. Behind them, a private booth was reset, and at the host stand, an envelope was retrieved, sealed, embossed. She didn't see any of it because she was too busy laughing like no one was watching. She always did love to believe she was in control. Let her, just for tonight. The real curtain doesn't rise until dessert. The sommelier appeared like clockwork. Sleek suit, polished voice, a binder of options heavy enough to imply importance. She flipped through it like she was choosing a yacht, not a wine. "Let's be bold," she said, tapping a label without hesitation. $400, I knew the bottle. Deep Bordeaux, velvet mouthfeel, a wine you order when you want to be remembered. She wasn't picking flavor, she was picking message. Bristow didn't flinch. He nodded with that arrogant little twitch in his jaw and waved the sommelier off like a man too rich to care. I watched her raise the glass slowly, theatrically, eyes locked on him like she was waiting for a cue. "To promotions," she said, "the kind that take time." She didn't even blink. Neither did I. At home, I was in my study, feet up, tie loose. The video feed streamed smoothly across my monitor, 4 angles, main dining cam, rear bar cam, entry vestibule, and thanks to a favor from Nathan, an angle from a recessed camera in the chandelier above their table. Cinematic. She leaned in, let her wrist brush his. He didn't pull back, didn't even try to make it subtle. His hand hovered over hers for just a second too long. It would be romantic if it wasn't so predictable. She was smiling the way people do when they think they're slipping past the rules. And Bristow, bless his overpaid ego, probably thought he was in the middle of some corporate seduction thriller. Except the twist wasn't in the bedroom. It was in the boardroom. While they exchanged flirtations and future promises over wine they wouldn't finish, my attorney hit send on an email labeled C+R Final Consolidated Voting Transfer, executed copies. 2 files. One was the final document making me majority shareholder of Calder Row Ventures. The other was the internal resolution, quietly passed earlier that day by the Reshape board, that effectively stripped Bristow of all discretionary spending privileges, including travel, including executive mentorship dinners. She didn't know it yet, but the very job she was angling for no longer existed. It had been quietly dissolved in a streamlining initiative she never bothered to read in the board memo last week. The best part, I didn't need to fire anyone. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just closed the trap, silently, elegantly. She swirled her glass, her laugh echoing across the rooftop like a car alarm in an empty lot. He leaned back in his chair, loosened his tie, smiled like a man who thinks he's holding the cards. I imagined telling him, "You're not even in the game anymore." Back on the screen, Bristow took a sip and said something smug. I couldn't hear it, but her reaction was pure theater. Eyes wide, hand to his forearm. Playful slap like something out of a soap opera. She used to do that to me once. I remember liking it before I knew what it meant. Before I understood, it wasn't affection. It was deflection. And tonight, her instincts were betraying her. Nathan circled near the host stand, nodding once to a man who discreetly delivered a tablet to a side station. The final coordination was in motion. Back on my desk, my phone lit up with a notification. Board login alert. Chairman access granted. I smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile people see, it was internal, like finishing a puzzle and realizing you were the only one who knew it was missing a piece. A minute later, another notification. Asset control transferred. Voting authority confirmed. Simple. Clinical. Lethal. I closed the tab, didn't need to watch anymore. I already knew the scene would end the way it always does, with her thinking she's whispering her way into power, not realizing the entire building she's in belongs to me. Let her toast. Let her flirt. Let her believe in the illusion one last time. Because after tonight, every door she walks through will be one I already unlocked. Or sealed shut. Dessert had just landed on the table. Something delicate, overplated, and predictably French. She clapped her hands softly when the waiter presented it, like a child seeing birthday candles. Bristow leaned forward, fork already in hand, saying something smooth that made her toss her hair and laugh again. Her fingers grazed his wrist with the kind of practiced ease that comes from too much rehearsal. She didn't know her spotlight was about to hit the floor. Nathan approached like a man on cue, posture perfect, face unreadable, the black folder tucked against his chest like scripture. "Excuse me, sir," he said, standing just to the side of Bristow, who barely glanced up from his fork. "Yeah?" Bristow asked, annoyed to be interrupted mid-flirt. "Your check." There was a half-second pause, the kind that stretches, not from confusion, but from the tiny fracture where control starts to slip. Bristow blinked. "I didn't ask for the check." "I know," Nathan said, calm as a surgeon. Then he extended the folder toward the table. "It's already been covered." Bristow gave a dry laugh. "By who?" Nathan opened the folder, slid a receipt across the white linen, the wine, the appetizers, the steak, the dessert, and across the bottom, written in elegant black ink above the company credit stamp, "Paid in full. Signature. The gentleman who owns your company." The table went silent, the kind of silence that doesn't just choke, it sharpens. Her face drained in real time. You could watch the blood retreat from her lips. She reached for the receipt like it might explain a different reality. Like if she touched it fast enough, it might vanish. Bristow tilted his head, trying to laugh it off. "Wait, what is this? Some kind of joke?" Nathan didn't smile. He simply pointed to the embossed company seal on the receipt and placed a second slip of paper beside it, an official holding structure document, discreet but very, very real. The top listed Calder Poirot Ventures, majority ownership transfer, dated and notarized. The gentleman also asked me to let you know, Nathan said gently, that he appreciates your taste in wine. And then he turned and walked away. Just like that. No drama, no confrontation, just the quiet click of a well-timed detonator. Bristow sat frozen, one hand still holding the fork midair. He looked at the receipt again, then at her. "What the hell is this?" She said nothing. For once, she had no script. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm expression she was trying to force. She opened her mouth, then closed it, reached for her clutch, looked toward the host stand like she might run. But where? It didn't matter. Because this wasn't just a message, it was a signature, and it was public. The couple at the next table, mid-anniversary toast, had gone silent, watching the scene. A waiter passing by slowed, sensing the shift in atmosphere. In a place built for hushed luxury, this was louder than a gunshot. "Who?" Bristow asked again, voice low but cracked. "Who the hell?" She whispered it before she could stop herself. "My husband." He stared at her like she'd just confessed to murder. And in a way, she had. Not his murder. Hers. The career she'd flirted into existence, the power she thought she'd seduced her way toward, all of it, pulled out from beneath her like a magician yanking a tablecloth, and leaving every dish shattered. She tried to recover, smoothed her dress, straightened her posture. "He's bluffing. He can't, he wouldn't." But she knew. And Bristow's phone buzzed on the table, cutting her off. Once. Twice. 3 times. He turned it over. Missed calls. 3 from the CFO. 1 from the chairman emeritus. Her eyes flicked to the screen. Then she finally understood. He wasn't bluffing. He never was. And the man she thought she left behind in a quiet house, tucked away with his dusty books and aging loyalty, had just ended her second act with a single name. His. She tried to laugh. That thin, brittle version of it. The kind that cracks at the edges like glass under pressure. "It's my husband," she said, forcing the words out as if saying them aloud might shrink their weight. "He's bluffing. He does this thing. He makes scenes." Bristow didn't answer. He was staring at his phone now, face slack. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from calm, but calculation. Multiple missed calls lit up the screen in stacked red notifications. CFO, 2, Linda, legal, Marcus, board, and 1 from private. The timestamps were all within the last 10 minutes. He didn't blink. She reached for her glass, hands shaking now. Took a sip of the $400 wine she suddenly couldn't taste. The sommelier stood off to the side, too polite to look directly at them, but his posture had stiffened. She noticed. Everyone noticed. A quiet came over the table, not the kind born from romantic tension, but the dense, oppressive kind that wraps around you when a truth starts leaking in through the cracks. That's what it was now, not an accusation, not a fight, a leak, a slow, factual, merciless flood. "Jonathan," she whispered, leaning forward, desperate. "He's screwing with us. He's trying to embarrass me." He didn't look up, just muttered. Why would he have the holding company's name? Her lips parted like she had something to say. But she didn't. Of course she didn't. Because she never paid attention to the paperwork, never read the envelopes that came to the house in the name of Graybriar Holdings. Thought they were boring, legal, uninteresting. She'd tossed 2 of them onto my desk herself just last month, unopened. "I thought it was junk," she'd said. "Right." Nathan returned, silent as a sermon. He placed another slip of paper between them, not the receipt this time, but a printout, 1 page, clean. At the top, the name, Graybriar Holdings, LLC. Underneath it, the full acquisition statement, finalized, time-stamped, legal. There in black ink was the date, the board vote summary, and most importantly, the ownership shift. Calder Row Ventures majority control, 51.8% primary stakeholder, Graybriar Holdings, LLC authorized signatory, redacted. Except it wasn't redacted. Not on the real copy. She knew the name, knew at the moment her eyes scanned the document, knew what it meant. The silence grew heavier. Nathan didn't linger. He simply said, "I suggest you both check your emails." And then he turned and walked away. No smile, no dramatics, just efficient, surgical execution. The kind of man who delivers a verdict, not a warning. Bristow's fingers finally moved, clumsy now, unlocking his phone. He tapped his email app, opened the top message. Subject: urgent, governance shift, immediate action required. His face drained as he read, paragraph after paragraph of clinical language confirming what Nathan had just made tangible. I had bought his company, and she had no idea, not until now. Her phone buzzed in her clutch, but she didn't move. Her hand hovered over the flap like it might burn her. She looked across the table at Bristow, whose shoulders had curled in slightly, like a man absorbing damage he couldn't see. "He can't," she tried again, voice thinner now. "He can't just—" "He didn't," Bristow said, without looking at her. "He did it months ago." The words landed like stones in her stomach. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a public shaming. It was a surgical restructuring, and it had already happened. The waiter returned to clear the plates. Dessert remained untouched, the wine half full. Her appetite had vanished along with her advantage. She sat there stiff, breath shallow, eyes darting, trying to construct a lifeline from words that no longer mattered. This wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't about a husband pushed too far. This was about architecture. He'd built something around her, walls she hadn't noticed, doors she didn't know were locked, windows that looked out over a landscape she thought she controlled. And now the foundation was shaking. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was realizing she didn't even know what to say anymore. The next morning, she arrived at the office earlier than usual, face composed, heels sharp against the marble, coffee in hand like a shield. Bristow didn't show up. His Audi remained conspicuously absent from the executive lot, but she strutted in like nothing had happened, like dinner hadn't detonated the very floor beneath her shoes. Denial can be armor if you wear it tight enough. The front desk nodded at her too quickly, a little too politely. One of the interns looked down as she passed, and her assistant, Emma, the one who used to chirp "morning" before the elevator even opened, didn't even look up from her screen. Her calendar was empty. She refreshed twice, still blank. The recurring leadership sync invite, gone. The Monday forecast call, gone. The Bristow 1-1 vanished like it never existed. She stormed down the corridor toward HR, heels echoing louder than usual, half panic, half theater. As she entered the glass-walled office, Caroline, the HR director, looked up and gave a tight, awkward smile that didn't make it to her eyes. "Caroline," she said, voice crisp, "my calendar's wiped." Caroline nodded slowly. "Yes, there's been a pause on some engagements pending review." "Review of what?" Her voice sharpened. "I haven't been told." "You will be," Caroline interrupted, measured and calm. "There's a memo being prepared." "A memo?" she snapped. "Based on what? A dinner?" Caroline didn't flinch. "Based on board realignment decisions." Silence. Not the heavy kind from the night before. This one was colder, more sterile. Like she'd just been handed a diagnosis with no emotion, just data. She tried to push further, asked about her direct reports, her team budgets, her travel approval flow, but Caroline's answers turned robotic. "That's under review. Pending transition. You'll be informed." By the time she got back to her desk, clean, almost too clean, Emma was gone. Just a sticky note. Had to step into finance, back later. No smiley face, no heart, no signature. Just the cold handwriting of someone already detaching. She sat, stared at her screen. Open Slack. 3 of her chat groups were archived. She opened her inbox. Then it buzzed. Unknown number. No caller ID. She stared at it a moment before answering. "Hello?" A woman's voice. Smooth, deliberate. Ice underneath satin. "You thought I wouldn't find out?" She didn't answer. "You thought I wouldn't hear about the mentorship trip to Napa? Or the Tokyo conference where my husband accidentally left his Apple Watch in the hotel suite you weren't booked into?" Her heart dropped. I think don't insult both of us. I don't care what you say. I care what you did and what you didn't think through." A breath. "My kids are home right now. They think I'm making them breakfast, but instead, I'm standing in my laundry room listening to a woman try to wreck my life without even doing it well. I didn't wreck anything. This isn't. The voice cut through like steel. You're about to learn what happens when you play games on someone else's board. Click. The call ended in static. She sat frozen, tried to call back. Blocked. The wine from last night soured in her stomach. Her fingers hovered over her mouse, unsure where to click. She opened Outlook again, scanned for any meeting, any anchor, but the sea was empty. By noon, 2 of her team members had walked by without a word. One of them, Darren, the guy who always lingered too long when she smiled, didn't even look up. He turned into the break room like she wasn't there. She tried to laugh it off, tried to tell herself they were just busy, but the laughter didn't come. Her throat felt too tight. By 1:30, she checked the board's internal comms site. Under Leadership Roster, her profile photo was still up, but her title had changed. No longer Executive VP, Strategy and Growth. Just TBD, Review Pending. And below that, a short note: this position is currently under structural reassessment following acquisition. Direct reports should forward all queries to interim lead C. Lambert. Chris Lambert, the same junior director she once snapped at for using the wrong font in a presentation. She opened her desk drawer, found the emergency mirror she kept tucked under some aspirin, and stared into it like it owed her an answer. All she saw was the beginning of a face she didn't recognize, the one that's there when the mask slips and no one looks away because no one cares anymore. Outside her door, someone laughed. Not at her, not loudly, just casually, happily, the way people laugh when they're not carrying secrets anymore. And that somehow hit harder than the call. The calendar invite came in at 5:08 a.m. Subject line: Emergency Board Session. Attendance mandatory. No context, no agenda, just a link, a time, and a short note. Majority shareholder present. She didn't sleep after that. The phrase curled in her gut like acid. Majority shareholder present, as she paced the living room in silk pajamas she hadn't earned. Every call she made that morning went unanswered. Bristow? Silent. Emma? I'm not involved in board matters. HR? Please refer to Caroline. Even Darren's voicemail had a new tone to it. Colder. Rehearsed. By 8:55 a.m., she was seated in one of the 12 leather chairs surrounding the executive board table, a lukewarm coffee trembling slightly in her hand. The room smelled like lavender floor polish and fear. The board filed in one by one, some avoiding eye contact, others glancing briefly, then looking away. Not one of them smiled. Caroline entered last, laptop in hand, lips pursed like someone about to administer morphine. All present? She asked without looking up. Except the CEO, someone muttered. Still remote. No, Caroline said. He's not joining. He sent a statement. A quiet ripple passed over the table. She gripped her cup tighter. Then, the screen came to life. Zoom window. Black square at first. Then it loaded. There he was, her husband, in a charcoal suit, seated in what looked like his study, the same study she used to walk past without noticing. No emotion on his face, no smirk, no rage, no trace of vindication, just the stillness of a man with nothing left to prove. He looked at the camera. Good morning, he said evenly. I won't make this difficult. Her stomach twisted. I've reviewed the internal governance protocols, he continued, and while I understand that not everyone agrees with the restructuring, I want to clarify something up front. Silence. This company, he said, voice calm and deliberate, deserves professional boundaries. He didn't name names. He didn't need to. The implication landed like a guillotine. Someone shifted in their chair. A few board members exchanged glances. One of them coughed into his sleeve. Caroline clicked into a file. For the record, the former CEO has submitted his resignation effective immediately. Gasps weren't heard, but felt. Her jaw went slack. Effective immediately? She repeated, too loud. Caroline turned to her, eyes neutral. Correct. Jonathan Bristow will no longer be with the company. But he didn't. His statement, Caroline said, lifting a printed email, reads, Given the recent acquisition and shifting priorities, I believe it is in the best interest of the firm that I step aside and allow for new leadership unclouded by personal association. Personal association. She opened her mouth again, but no sound came out. Then Caroline turned to her fully. The board has voted to place you on administrative leave while an internal review is conducted regarding compliance and professional conduct guidelines. Leave? She choked. A nod. Effective immediately. I haven't done anything wrong, she said, though even she didn't believe the words. This is retaliation. This is personal. A board member interrupted. Your access to internal files will be suspended as of this afternoon. We'll arrange courier delivery for your personal items. She stared around the room. 12 faces, some blank, some embarrassed, one sympathetic, but it was the kind of sympathy people reserve for watching someone else's car get towed. Please, she whispered, this is a mistake. The Zoom screen remained fixed on her husband. He hadn't spoken since his opening line. Now he did. Everything's been documented. Her breath caught. He could have said anything. He could have gloated, mocked, but instead, just that, clean, final, everything's been documented. That sentence was worse than any insult, because it meant the story wasn't just known, it was archived, filed, time-stamped, etched into company servers she no longer had access to. She looked at the screen, looked at the man she used to share dinner with, vacations, a home. But he was no longer her husband. He was the man who owned the table she was being dismissed from. Caroline closed her laptop. This concludes the session, she said quietly. We'll follow up with next steps via legal counsel. The board stood, chairs pushed back. No one said goodbye. She sat there frozen, one hand still on the coffee she never drank. The screen flickered, her husband disconnected. Just like that. They called her in at 4:03 p.m., not a calendar invite, not even a knock. Just a quick ping on Slack from Caroline. HR needs 10 minutes. Please come now. No title, no smiley face. She stood in the hallway for a few seconds before going in, like the pause might somehow keep it from being real. She adjusted her blazer, tugged at the sleeves, dabbed her under eyes with a tissue in the ladies' room mirror, trying to erase the hours she spent frozen in that boardroom chair. When she walked into HR, the blinds were drawn. Caroline sat at the end of the table, flanked by one of the compliance lawyers she didn't recognize, and an HR assistant typing quietly on a laptop. A manila folder sat on the table in front of them, like a death certificate waiting for a signature. Have a seat, Caroline said, neutral as ever. She didn't sit. Am I being fired? No, you're being transitioned. Same thing. Caroline didn't argue. She just slid the folder across the table. You'll retain your benefits for 18 months. Severance is detailed on page 3. Stock options vesting through Q2, contingent on continued NDA compliance. Legal counsel is available to review should you choose. She flipped it open, scanning quickly. Page after page of dry language, numbers she couldn't process, a gag order that extended beyond internal matters. She wasn't allowed to discuss the details of the acquisition, the shareholder shift, or the boardroom decision. This is a muzzle, she muttered, flipping back to the first page. You're asking me to disappear. Caroline didn't flinch. We're offering closure. The legal rep cleared his throat gently. We've also included a line of recommendation should you need external positioning. It emphasizes your early contributions to the growth division and avoids mention of recent events, she finished bitterly. Silence again. She stared at the signature line. Did he orchestrate all of this just to humiliate me? Her voice cracked. It came out raw, involuntary, a whisper of the arrogance she'd worn like armor for years. Caroline paused. Not stiff, not harsh, just tired. He never said a word, she answered. Just signed the papers. Her breath caught. Not a word. No message, no confrontation. Just a pen stroke behind a door she'd never bothered to knock on. Her hands went numb. She scanned the NDA again, saw the clause at the bottom, one paragraph, set off from the rest, a reminder that breach would result in forfeiture of all remaining compensation and legal action by the company's primary shareholder. She laughed, dry and low. He really thought of everything, didn't he? Caroline didn't respond. She signed, because what else was left? On her way back to her office, she passed Emma. The girl looked down, suddenly fascinated by her stapler. She walked past the break room. Darren was in there, laughing at something on his phone. Laughed too loud, like someone who'd just removed a weight. Her office door was already open. Inside, a cardboard box. Someone had already started for her. framed diploma, mug, the plant she'd stopped watering last month. They'd left the pens. She stared at it all. Everything she'd built, broken down to fit into a 12-inch square. When she walked out, no one made eye contact. The floor felt brighter, lighter, like it had already begun to forget her. She reached the lobby. The front desk receptionist was flipping through a clipboard. She used to greet her every morning with "Great shoes, Dana," or "Love that blazer." But today, nothing. No glance, no nod, not even a blink of recognition. The sliding glass doors opened automatically, soft hiss, like the sigh of a building exhaling her name. She didn't turn around, because why would she? She was already a ghost. The Radcliffe Ballroom looked different that night. Not just the upgraded lighting or the high-gloss banners draped across the mezzanine, not even the logo, the new, polished, modern serif that replaced the old Calderpaw row. What struck her most was how loud the room felt, not in sound, but in energy, purpose. Smiles that were too wide, conversations that carried weight, people with plates in hand and power in their stride, and none of it had her name on it anymore. She stood near the back, barely inside the velvet ropes. She hadn't RSVP'd, but they let her in anyway. Out of habit or oversight, she wasn't sure. The intern at the check-in desk had done a quick double-take, then handed her a black guest tag without saying her name aloud. Not Ms. Rowe, not Executive VP, just a guest. She hadn't planned on staying long. She thought maybe she'd just stand in the back, sip something bitter, leave early before it got awkward. But she stayed, because when everything's been taken from you, you start watching like a thief. Quiet, calculated, desperate to understand how the thing you once owned functions without you. It functioned just fine. The new CEO was someone she didn't recognize. Young, sharp, likable in the way people are when they know they didn't have to claw their way to the top over broken glass and body counts. She didn't see Bristow. Of course not. Word was, he'd left the country. Something about a consulting gig in Munich. Something about starting over. She tried to imagine him explaining this to his wife, to their kids. Tried to imagine the version of the story where he wasn't a middle-aged cliché who bet his career on late-night texts and hotel bar mentorships. At 8:42 p.m., the lights dimmed. A hush swept through the crowd as the screen lowered. The video began. Crisp graphics, upbeat strings, clips of smiling staff, modern offices, zoom-ins of handshakes and conference rooms and product rollouts that looked more cinematic than real. Then came the voiceover. In a world of change, leadership isn't just about direction. It's about who has the courage to rewrite the terms. Images of board members shaking hands, employees packing swag bags, stock charts climbing, and finally, at the very end, a still image. A man in a navy suit, standing at the center of a private dinner table, raising a glass. Her husband, smiling, surrounded by 6 people who had once refused to shake his hand, the very people who, 6 months ago, barely remembered he had a last name. He looked at ease. More than that, he looked like he belonged. Below the image, the caption scrolled across the screen. To the gentleman who made this possible. Applause. Real, thunderous applause. She didn't clap. Her hands were clenched too tightly around her purse, nails biting into the faux leather. No one turned toward her. No one whispered. No sideways glances. No, "Isn't that she?" Or "Wasn't she?" Because she wasn't. Not anymore. She was a ghost in a room full of people who had moved on. Her name had been stripped from every hallway, her photo removed from the leadership wall, her ID deactivated, her legacy sandblasted until there wasn't even dust left to mourn. The video ended. Music swelled. People raised their glasses in unison, mimicking the screen. Laughter returned. Waiters moved like clockwork between clusters of success stories. She stood alone, half lit by the emergency exit sign, no drink in hand, no seat at the table, no reason to linger. But she did, long enough to feel the moment finish without her, long enough to realize there wouldn't be a comeback. Not from this, not when the final toast was raised to the man she thought was invisible. He hadn't taken her down in a fury. He'd written her out with a smile, and worse, he made it look effortless.